Today the folks at Riot decided to give us a little bit of a surprise, and they officially confirmed that Bilgewater is in fact the last and final region in the upcoming expansion for Legends of Runeterra. Now, they also gave us some card reveals, so we're going to cover what cards were shown today. They didn't reveal any champions directly, but they did reveal essentially that Misfortune is going to be in the set. And we know that from Mind voice lines anyway, but since she's figured pretty prominently in the reveal video, it's safe to assume that she's going to be there. Now, I will put a link to the reveal video so that you can see that if you have not already in the video description, but we want to talk about the cards, right? So let's do that now. Leading off with a new keyword, Plunder. So this is the kind of core mechanic, it would seem anyway, of Bilgewater, and the Plunder mechanic itself says a card triggers its Plunder ability when played if you damaged the enemy nexus this round. Now, this is really, really interesting to me because of its design. I love the design. I love it when flavor and function meet. I think this is a great way to represent pirates in a game. So I'm just flavor-wise a really big fan of this mechanic. They did reveal with the keyword reveal a Poro. So this is our first reveal. I'm not going to go super in depth with this because it's a 1-drop and it's a 1/1 Poro that just says Plunder, grant me 2 random keywords. Now, if you're coming from the Elder Scrolls Legends, seeing 2 random keywords on a card probably triggers some unhappy PTSD moments from things like Royal Sage, or I'm not even going to talk about portals. But the good news is that most of the keywords are relatively balanced when it comes to Legends of Runeterra, and unless they add more keywords at a later point that really cause this to high roll, it's pretty unimpressive, even if you get a perfect high roll. For example, this game lacks lethal or poison if you're coming from Hearthstone, so you don't really have to worry about that. That would be like the big high roll. Honestly, the keyword I would want most in almost any deck would be Challenger, so like Challenger and something would be kind of nice, but even the 1/1 Poro that has Challenger now doesn't see play, so I don't imagine that this one is going to suddenly break the game. But it is a great way to just add a Poro, because that is a cycle, and show off the core mechanic, if you will, or core keyword that's going to be associated with Bilgewater. And so I do really like this. Now, there's a couple of things I want to point out about the keyword itself, and that is that Plunder says when played, so I do not believe this will trigger on summon effects. Why does that matter? Well, weird niche case scenarios where perhaps you have damaged the enemy nexus and combat has resolved, and then you play like Mist's Call, for example, and you revive a unit that has Plunder. It would be my understanding, based on the way that this is worded, that that would then not trigger Plunder. This is essentially the same as the play keyword, but it's conditional based on whether or not you have damaged the enemy nexus. Now, I reached out to somebody that I know at Riot, and they did confirm for me that Plunder will trigger if you have damaged the enemy nexus with Teemo's mushrooms. So I know there was some speculation about whether or not they counted as you damaging the enemy nexus because you put them on their cards and then they draw them and it's their card dealing them damage. But they went and they tested it for me on an internal thing, and they did confirm. So this is a really cool mechanic for Teemo. This is a really cool mechanic for some of the Freljord cards that we had already seen. For example, the siege weapon that looked just awful. All right, I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. It still looks pretty bad for a 4-drop, but at least you now understand why it exists and how it can help be an enabler for this. And I'll talk about, when we're done talking about all the reveals, some great ways to really ramp up the Plunder mechanic. But I'm going to put a graphic up now that showcases all of the cards that were revealed on Twitter today, even though one of them is a bit of a repeat, but now we get to know more about it. So first up is Warning Shot, and I'm starting with that because I think that this is a nice enabler and very indicative of exactly what you're trying to do with the Bilgewater region. So Warning Shot is a 0-cost burst spell that simply says deal 1 to the enemy nexus. Now, obviously this is here to help you trigger Plunder, but this is already giving me Ezreal nightmares. I just had to say it. It costs 0 natively, and it does damage to the Nexus. And it's a burst spell. Why? Oh. But anyway, again, you understand what it's trying to do. It's supposed to be a nice 0-cost Plunder trigger. We haven't seen the full set yet, but I imagine that the real usefulness of this would be in some sort of like aggressive list where maybe you're also utilizing Plunder and you're trying to, you know, play this on maybe turn 4 or 5 and then follow it up with maybe a Plunder 2-drop, a Plunder 3-drop, that sort of thing. So it's a neat card, and it pokes. The next one I want to talk about is Citrus Courier. This is a 6-cost 4/5, but with Plunder, you heal all allies and your Nexus 3, and then rally. This card feels really good. Like, kind of bonkers good, if I'm being honest. I remember when Crown Guard during the preview event was a 7-cost body that gave you rally, and it saw a lot of play. And she's been creeping back into the meta with some of the Undying lists. But at 8, she's a bit expensive. The body, I don't think matters on Citrus Courier here. Like, 4/5 is nice, but honestly, like, if this was a 4/4, I think it would also see just as much play. What really matters is that you're getting something plus a heal plus a rally on a body. This feels really, really good as a top-end card for any sort of proactive list. I like it. And the nice thing is that this worst-case scenario, you know, could end up just being like a free 4 damage even. If you have some sort of combat and both sides of the board clear, but maybe because of Overwhelm or some sort of attacking effect, whether that's from Noxus or like a Boom Crew Rookie or whatever the case, right? You could have a scenario where you literally attack and you get no bonus damage in from actually attacking, but then you could still just pop this down and swing for 4. That's not a bad card. Like, I'm very excited to try this out in many proactive lists, mostly because I just miss aggro being relevant in the meta, and it's been a while. So I like Citrus Courier a lot. Next up, we have Jagged Taskmaster. This is a 3-cost 4/3 in the Bilgewater region that says Plunder. Grant 1-cost allies everywhere +1/+0. This card is sneaky good. The 4/3 for 3 is very fine as far as a stat line goes. Again, obviously you prefer 4 health over 3, but this is a nice aggressive stat line. Does not have a keyword, so you lose out a little bit there, but granting 1-cost allies everywhere. So this means even ones that will be created later, +1/+0. This card has spiders written all over it, for example, because this means that if you play like a decent 1-drop, maybe an Elise on 2, even if your Elise dies to a block, but the spider punches on 3, you get this Jagged Taskmaster on the board, and then suddenly when you're playing that Brood Awakening, you're making 3 ones, and that's after just 1 Taskmaster resolves. This card, I think, has a lot of potential. I think that this card could also be something that you play in like a Kinku Elusives variant, where, you know, maybe instead of Freljord cards, you're running Taskmaster and then, you know, 1 other card for your 6-card slot. This is just interesting to me. I think that there's a lot to look at here. It also works really well with Teemo, and as I said before, Teemo's mushrooms do help you trigger Plunder, so I fully expect in one way, shape, or form there to be some sort of P&Z and Bilgewater list that gets played in the first week or so. When things settle down and the meta gets figured out, maybe it's not strong enough, but I do expect that to be a thing. So yeah, I like this card. Wolf Rider is the next one we're going to look at. This one is also very interesting to me. This is a 4-cost Freljord card. You get a 4/3 stat line with the Overwhelm keyword, but it also has Plunder, get an empty mana gem. Now, it's interesting from a lot of perspectives, really, because the Overwhelm and some of the other Overwhelm cards that we've already seen revealed as well, it lets you kind of ensure you're getting your Plunder, right? Overwhelm and Bilgewater might be going hand in hand. I very much see Bilgewater being paired with Freljord, Noxus, and P&Z. very easily, and Demacia. Like Bilgewater, because of the way Plunder works, I think has a lot of natural pairings, which is beautiful. That's what you want. If you're going to introduce a brand new region, you want it to feel like you can find a home in most other places. So with the recent emphasis of Overwhelm in Freljord, I think that that is a potential landing spot. And I think that you might have, how do I want to put this? Like a nice mid-range deck. So the reason that Wolf Rider is interesting to me is because this is not really an aggro card. Gaining an empty mana gem means absolutely nothing if your curve ends at 5 or 6 anyway. But if you're playing some sort of proactive list that has a decent number of top-end options, things that cost 7 or 8 that you do want to get onto the board, then suddenly Wolf Rider here is a lot more attractive. But it's also a reasonable body for you to play on for. So this could very well be, you know, there was a time where you were playing like Chumpwump and decks just because of what he did for you at 4. He kind of was the best of everything. And I could very easily see Wolf Rider becoming maybe that for Freljord. But that being said, again, with the mushrooms triggering Plunder, it's also entirely possible that Chumpwump just sees the exact same amount of play as he has for some time now, right? Mushrooms being a pretty big deal. I also mentioned Noxus because they have Overwhelm. I mentioned Noxus because the existence of Plunder drastically increases Blade's Edge and its value. Like, it was already seeing some play here or there as an anti-aggro tool or to help out Ezreal, but Blade's Edge, yes, we've got Warning Shot here, but it's very versatile because it can target anything, so you can use it for Plunder or you can use it to get rid of something with 1 health or help out that little bit of combat. Like, Blade's Edge is simple of a card as it is. It actually goes way up in value just by Plunder being a mechanic that exists. So I mentioned Noxus. I also mentioned PNZ because you've got things like Boom Crew and obviously their direct damage. And I mentioned Demacia for Scout, and I'll hit that one pretty heavy at the end here. But next I want to talk about Ursine Spirit Walker. This is a 5-cost 4/6. But has Plunder of I transform into Stormclaw Ursine. Now, when I did the Freljord review video, at the time we had only seen Stormclaw, and I did note that there was no gem there. Now we know why. So, you don't just always get a Stormclaw Ursine. However, this card is still bonkers on 5. And I imagine that if you're putting this kind of card in your deck, you've got a lot of ways to make sure that you're triggering that Plunder. So I stand by everything I said in the Freljord review video, which is Stormclaw Ursine is insane on 5. Just absolutely insane on 5. Now, the one drawback is because it's triggered off of Plunder, that means you're not likely attacking with it on 5 unless you have some sort of other trigger. But again, that's where like Blade's Edge really rises in value, because if you've got even just 1 mana banked because maybe you skipped turn 1, then you can use your spell mana to poke their Nexus and then drop Stormclaw and swing on 5. Like, Stormclaw is just really, really good. And when I talk about mid-range kind of Freljordy decks that might want to utilize Wolf Rider, Stormclaw is another card I would imagine would be in there, and then you might have some more top-end options as well. Stormclaw is a really good card. So Ursine Spirit Walker is just the card that turns into Stormclaw. Next up, we have the one that was revealed today that really gets my deck building brain working. So this is Smooth Soloist. It is a 7-cost 3/4 out of Bilgewater, but it says Plunder, reduce the cost of all allies in your hand and deck by 2, and it's got elusive to boot. So the 3/4 stat line is obviously not great at 7, but it does have 4 health. It does have a very relevant keyword in elusive, and the Plunder effect just feels interesting. Now, you've got to have some way to refill your hand. By the time you're getting to 7, if you're playing anything that's relatively aggressive, you might have not a lot going on in your hand. If you're playing a slower list, you're already kind of built for the late game, so that kind of cost reduction might not matter as much. But that much flat cost reduction just really makes me start questioning what you can do in a single turn, right? There's going to be, like, I'm going to wait until the entire set's revealed, and then I'll start really trying to tackle this. This is a card that's entirely about context, and it's either going to see no play at all, or it's going to be part of some really busted combo, and there's not much room in between, in my opinion. Reducing the cost of all the allies in your hand and deck by 2 on a turn before you play potentially Progress Day, and then also reduce the cost of the card you're drawing by 1, means you could, in theory, you know, be playing just a ton of stuff at bargain basement prices for the rest of the game. But the trick is going to be making sure that you've got enough of them to play. Again, at 7, this card comes down late enough that by the time you play it, you can pay for a lot of things anyway. So it's only going to be relevant when you're playing multiple cards a turn for a very long time. But if you get to that point and there's some sort of chain that you can pull off, then this card becomes really insane. The other thing that immediately gets my brain going is I think about the Piltover and Zon cards that were revealed, and you know, there is the one that basically says when you play a 2-cost card, you draw another one and it gains fleeting. And obviously people were thinking of natural 2-cost cards, but a card like this really makes me want to start thinking about 4-cost cards. And speaking of, the card that does that starts that chain, is a 4-cost 3/3. So if you have multiples of them in your deck and you have the first one down and now you've played Smooth Soloist, from then on, if you keep playing them at 2, then you're drawing even that many more cards, right? So again, I don't know what'll end up being the combo, but this screams combo all over it. And I firmly believe this is the kind of card that will either enable something degenerate or just not see much play at all. And again, there's just not much room in between. Its value is entirely based on its plunder, so it's interesting. Now, the last card that was revealed is potentially one of those top-end cards in some sort of Freljord mid-range that I was talking about, and it's got one heck of a plunder effect. So this is an 8-cost 7/7 in Freljord. It's called the Tusk Raider. On Plunder, double the power and health of allies in your deck, and when you play it, you also draw a Sejuani. Now, I assume that happens in that direct order, which means that the Sejuani you would draw would be huge because of any relevant plunder triggers. But if there was a reason that you wanted to run Wolf Rider and ramp into something, Tusk Raider might fit the bill, because at that point, every threat you draw is a threat good enough to close out the game. Like, Tusk Raider very much feels like the kind of power spike that could be a real finisher for a mid-range list. And I know in my last video I kind of got on my soapbox and I was feeling a bit down about the state of things just because everything was chasing power spikes. But as you're looking for potentially very relevant ones in the stuff revealed today, I see at least 2. Citrus Courier being able to give you another body and rally on 6 very well could be the kind of card that pushes something over the edge. And Tusk Raider in the right kind of mid-range list could also very well be a card that you kind of go off afterwards, right? Like, once you get the Tusk Raider resolved, after that, everything you play is just insane. So it's an interesting card. It's entirely possible it's also still too slow. That's the interesting thing, is you look at this card and it's kind of insane what it does all on a single body, but it's also entirely possible it's still too slow. It has no keywords on its own, and it's only powering up everything that you're playing from that point on, and that's already, 2 turns away or 3 turns away from when an Ezreal deck is likely just going to up and kill you. So it's entirely possible that's still too slow. But cards like Wolf Rider that ramp you there also might be relevant enough to help with that. It's going to be something you have to test. We'll wait and see. I got to see the whole set, but it catches my eye. So the last thing I want to talk about is the existence of Plunder and how it so directly helps Scout. So if you go all the way back to our first reveal, Scout was the keyword that debuted with the Demacia reveals, and it essentially was, if you attack with only Scout units, then you reset your attack to get a second attack. And that means that if you attack with a scout unit and it goes unblocked, or any number of your scout units actually deal damage, you'll reset your attack, but then you can play cards with Plunder and they'll also get to attack even though they've triggered their Plunder. So Scout is going to very much be yet another tool available to Bilgewater for triggering Plunder and abusing Plunder. And when you start thinking about a deck that, you know, has some Scout cards and they attack, and then now your Plunder's triggered, so you play Citrus Courier after, you know, your second attack, right? So it's like Scout, attack, play something, attack, Citrus Courier, attack. There's some pretty absurd things that you'll be able to do. Relentless Pursuit already fits into that game plan as well. I really think like Scout and Bilgewater might end up being degenerate, and I know Scout and Ionia is going to end up being degenerate just because of the presence of elusive cards like Ghost, etc. There's just... The interesting thing about Scout plus Plunder here is it's going to give you the ability, if the cards are strong enough and there's enough to support it, it's going to give you the ability to punish people in both stages of a round. So usually, like when you're deck building or you're thinking about your path for navigating any particular turn, any particular round, you are trying to, or at least you should be thinking about, what do I do in the event of an open attack? What do I do if they slow play and they play cards before attacking, and what do I do to prevent myself from being in a bad position against an open attack the next turn, right? Those are kind of like three core facets among everything else going on in a turn, but those are three core facets of the game that you kind of always have to consider. Do I expect them to open attack? And if they do, what can I do about it? If they don't open attack, what is my game plan? What do I do about it? And then at the end of the turn, what do I do to put myself in the best position to prepare for an open attack if you're on the other side? So if it's your turn and you attacked and you expect them to open attack next turn again, like at the end of that round, what am I doing to prepare for that? So Scout plus Plunder really makes you say to yourself, like, all right, I have to be prepared for the Scout portion of the open attack, but then I also have to be prepared for the Plunder part. And it's gonna throw people for a bit of a loop, I think. So we shall see. It's entirely possible that, you know, the game is balanced enough that that is still reasonable to do. I haven't seen a lot of things Scout-wise that scream overpowered to me. Definitely some very, very good cards, but I think that you can have answers to some of those questions. I don't know. I'm really excited to see what the rest of the set holds. I know that we still have a lot of Bilgewater champions yet to be revealed, and that's going to tell us a lot about, I think, how we are being pushed to build Bilgewater decks, if that makes sense, because almost every champion in the game has some sort of like build around me facet to them, and we know that's part of Riot's just core design philosophy, because they've said in the past, hey, we want every champion to feel like they've got a best fit for a deck, and at least one deck helps them like realize their dream, if that makes sense. So I'm just really looking forward to Bilgewater in that regard. The more we see of the champions, the more we're going to get a feel for the identity of the region, and that, I think, will tell us more about what the game is going to feel like after this first expansion. Again, they called it the Rising Tides expansion. It will be live in 4 days as I film this, so I'm filming this on the 24th. It'll be live April 28th. Their advertising official launch is April 30th, but that's likely because they're also, with the official launch, coinciding it with mobile launch globally, but sometimes, depending on the app store and depending on the region, it can take as much as like 48 hours to properly propagate. So they're advertising it as the 30th so that if anybody goes to access it on the 30th, it's just available for them. But the reality is, if you're like me and you've been playing this on PC, it'll be around on April 28th. So 4 days. So you see some Bilgewater champions. I think in 2 days even, we get the rest of the entire set revealed. So we will take a pretty deep dive when that happens. But anyway, yeah, that's it. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for putting up with some of my rants. I really like the Plunder mechanic. I want to see where Bilgewater lands as a region thematically. I mean, I think we kind of already know where it's going just based on what we've seen, but champions kind of make or break things in that regard in many cases, so that's what I'm looking forward to. I want to see Misfortune. I want to see the Rust. I'm not, I'll be honest, not a big pirate guy. I never really have been. I don't get it. It's just smelly water thieves. Nobody's like, hey man, you know what my favorite thing is? Like burglars. But that's all pirates are. They're just burglars on water. They just break into your boat and steal your stuff, and I don't know. I've never got it. I'm not a pirate guy. So thematically, I'm like, eh. But from a flavor and design standpoint, I like what I'm seeing out of the Bilgewater region, and I do like a lot of the characters just because of the characters, not necessarily because I'm like a pirate guy. So we'll see. I'm really looking forward to our next expansion. Spoiler, like the Mount Targan stuff is gonna for sure be up my alley, but yeah, nonetheless, expansion soon, new decks soon. That's what I'm just dying to actually brew new territory, really shake things up. That's what I can't wait for. So if you made it this far, again, I appreciate you. Thanks for watching. If it's your first time here, consider subscribing. Thank you for giving the video a shot. If you are a returning viewer, well then I love you more because you watched and endured me and decided to come back. So thanks. And till next time.